You're listening to the Ask Drone U podcast. You ask, we answer your drone questions. Whether you're here to turn your passion into profit or you simply fly for fun, we're a community of learners and teachers who aspire to achieve greatness. We are
Drone U.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another news edition of the Ask Drone U podcast. Joining me, as always, flying under the radar, above it, or through it, we're not sure. He is the Flying Dutchman all the way from Drone XL. Hiya, how are you doing?
Hey Paul, Happy New Year, man.
Happy New Year to you as well. It looks like we were given some gifts to prepare us for this new year in the likes of remote ID, or maybe it wasn't a gift, but I gotta say, one gift the FAA did give us is not launching remote ID on the 26th of December. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we got 2 additional days, which almost made me nervous. I thought they weren't going to make the deadline before the end of this year there for a second.
Well, they definitely had all of us going, that is for sure. And you know what? Let's just hop into this week's first story, which we wrote, what drones are compliant with remote ID, which just kind of brings us into remote ID. And we wrote this story on the premise that, well, with remote ID not kicking in for 30 months from the date of publishing, that the drones that you have now, at least the Drone U community, your drones, your fleet, your commercial fleet, well, if you're amortizing your drones, chances are you might buy 1 or even 2 drones before remote ID is implemented. And with that said, look at all of the drones that DJI currently makes that has or is seen by the Aeroscope system. This system was used as the example for broadcast ID, yet the FAA said they didn't want to use it because it posed an undue burden on the pilots and others to comply. It was expensive. So while these drones do have the hardware, we wrote this article with the assumption that with a firmware upgrade that they could comply. With that said, it's also the argument that, well, in the time that remote ID is implemented, chances are these drones won't even be in your fleet. Now, Haya, before we get into this too much, before the show, we were really getting into remote ID and what we've kind of seen in the groups and the responses from pilots. And when we got right into this equipment issue and what drones do comply and what drones don't, you were like, does it really matter? And I think that the answer is no, but there's a lot more to this story.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think it very much depends on the kind of drone pilot that you are, the kind of drone that you fly. I mean, I can imagine if you fly RC model airplanes or you fly FPV drones, that's a whole different ballgame. And I hope that whatever remote ID hardware will be available, that it's going to be super light and small and easy to attach on any aircraft for that matter. When you look at the more consumer type drone pilots, let's say the people that are more likely to buy DJI drones, I think that's a different ballgame in itself. Brandon Schulman from DJI already indicated on social media that they're working on making this an easy transition, basically. And I can imagine why. I mean, if I was going to be DJI, I don't want people, let's say, breaking the rules or getting in trouble with our products. So for them to facilitate it, to make it easy for drone pilots to comply with remote ID for drones makes a lot of sense. And I think also the drone manufacturers don't have the same 30 months. I mean, their products need to be compliant. I think it's 18 months before or after 18 months. So they have a slightly shorter time frame than we have. So I would imagine that, let's say, a year, 2 years from now, all their drones will most likely be compliant with remote ID going forward, even though you don't have to have it yet as a drone pilot. And I would imagine that a lot of their existing newer models will be able to be upgraded to be compliant as well. So I think that's a good thing. Of course, the question is how many people are actually willing to comply. And I know you guys ran some surveys on that in the past. I think that's still a big question mark, is how many people are actually going to comply with these new rules, and also who's going to enforce these rules. And I think there's still a lot of that remains to be seen when it comes to this, basically.
I think you could not be more right. And we did run a survey. In fact, the amount of people who responded to that survey was incredible. And I wanted to make sure that we asked the question about compliance in two ways. One, by asking the user to respond in if they would comply, but then also their perception of other pilots' ability to comply. And when we ran the question, an overwhelming majority, I want to say it was over 75%, said that they expect more than 75% of pilots not to comply. But the key point here is that was based on the proposed rules, which had network ID in it.
Yeah.
I asked in a few different areas this weekend in different forums, just asking about opinions regarding remote ID and what compliance is going to be. And one person, very funny, he wrote, "You should probably ask in 2 years," which is a good point because it really illustrates, is it even going to be top of mind at that time frame? And it's really, we're unsure. But I would also say that there's a large group of people outside of kind of, the commercial interests that are really not happy with remote ID, which brings us into our next couple stories. So we can just roll into this, Haya, because we got a couple of stories here regarding the module. One particular story that you wrote this week says that Apple may even be in the works for modems for drones in a patent filing. And I'm wondering, are we expecting Apple to get into the modules that we have or that have been proposed for remote ID on the broadcast side? And then I know that a popular proponent in the industry, he's been on my show numerous times, and you may remember him from one particular show because he wore a horse head. I'm not really sure I understand the symbolism there, but anyway, he did do that. We're talking about Kenji Sugahara, very, very knowledgeable regarding law, and it shows because he was awarded a patent as well for a module, which had a lot of people, asking some questions. But after digging through this, you got to admit, Kenji is pretty brilliant for what he did and when he did it. But Haya, there's so much more to both of these stories. I'm just trying to get the ball to continue to roll. What's going on here?
Let's back up then and start with the Apple one. I mean, of course, I think a lot of people would be super excited if Apple actually entered the drone market and came out with a drone. I don't think that that's what this is about at all. I doubt Apple would do that. It'd be super cool if they did, but I'm not counting on that. This is more of a modem device that we think has to do with Apple using drones to map the world around us. I mean, of course, we have Google Maps. Apple has a competing mapping product, if you will, or Maps product. For them to be able to get that information and have accurate information out there, they've been using drones for that. We know that. It seems that this is a system that's going to help them to allow multiple drones to fly and collect all that information and have more accurate information to make these maps on your iPad or iPhone be more accurate and be smarter. I'm not expecting to see Apple launch a consumer drone anytime soon. I don't think that's on their radar at all, to be honest. Going to Kenji's story, that's of course, it's exciting. I mean, he was able to get a patent filed and awarded to him as not quite the first, but his patent dates back the furthest. He was involved in different committees, the DEC committee, but also other committees that were working on remote ID for drones with the FAA. So you could argue that he had inside information almost, or at least information possibly before other people would have access to that. I saw on social media some people were like, hey, is this smelly? I mean, is he just taking advantage of the position he's been in? I'm not quite sure if that's the case. I mean, I know that he was working on a method to make remote ID for drones possible. That's what's now being patented. And I guess theoretically you could sell that to drone manufacturers. Although I also know that patents can a lot of times easily be avoided, basically. Like if you copy somebody else's invention, but it's slightly different, then that patent might not even protect him. And it's always very hard to protect patents and to make sure that you get the money that you think you're entitled to. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I would imagine that big drone manufacturers like DJI, for instance, will come up with their own solution and will not use somebody else's patent for this. So it's very cool, I think, that he was able to get this done. It's impressive for sure. I know he's done a lot for the drone industry and the drone community as a whole. So to make him see something come back to him in return, I think it's not necessarily unfair. And I think we benefit all from people like Kenji and others that are promoting the drone industry and promoting our hobby and are helping to come up with solutions that are actually cost effective and feasible and don't make the drone hobby and business impossible. So
Kenji has been a huge proponent, especially for drone service providers. I know that some people were, saying, well, hey, hold on a minute. Is this a conflict of interest? But what about all the other people sitting on the DAC? What about Verizon? What about CNN?
Oh,
I mean, at some point, you could argue that almost all of them are a conflict of interest, frankly. But a lot of people would argue it's not a conflict of interest. I mean, you can decide, practically speaking, what the unintended consequences are. Let's use, the 737 MAX as the example. So should the system change of private public? I think it's a good question to ask. I'm not sure what the answer is. Kenji's brilliant, and frankly, I think this is great. And I don't think he was. I don't think it was really a conflict of interest.
I mean, imagine the opposite, right? If you want to prevent situations like these, then you would have had the FAA work on this solution all by themselves without any expertise from the drone industry. And I think you would never have come to such a workable solution as they were able to do now. So I think, yes, there might be a risk of a conflict of interest, but I'm also not sure if without all these other partners, you'd even be able to come up with a workable technology that includes both hardware and software. I mean, you need experts on the table. And I think there are ways to safeguard and to make sure that there's no insider trading or people benefiting from knowledge that's not publicly available. I think the FAA would have had a hard time to come up with a remote ID solution that would be anywhere feasible without any external help at all.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's extremely important to note that Kenji as a proponent was a proponent of what's practical. Now, I know that upsets a lot of FPV people, a lot of recreational hobbyists, because they're like, well, he still promoted remote ID. Well, he was trying to bring the people off of the ledge and say, hold on. This is not going to work. I mean, he worked together with us to get the message out regarding the terrible nature of network RID. And I think the net benefit of it all is extremely positive, because if he wasn't there, there's really not a lot of presence as far as practical drone operators. And the fact that he pushed things as far as he did, I think it was, again, a net positive for the industry. And I think he should benefit. But the one thing I wanted to, a lot of people have been like, is it fair? It's unfair. That is the most manipulative word in the entire English language. That is the true F-bomb that should never be dropped. If you're in a negotiation and someone says, is that fair? It's just like, oh, man.
I don't know if that's a fair example, but I'll take it. No, you're right. And I mean, remote ID was going to happen regardless. So I think if you know that that's a given, then it's probably in everybody's best interest to work to the best possible solution. And I think he definitely contributed to getting there. So for that, I'm thankful for sure. It would have been a lot scarier if the FAA was going to try to come up with something without any feedback from the industry. So I think this is still, it might not be perfect. I totally understand there's still a lot of concerns, and I agree with quite a few of them, to be honest. But I think it's still better than what the original proposed remote ID rules were going to be. And we still got 3 years. Maybe we can still fine-tune some things here and there, work on the privacy concerns that some people have, make sure it's retrofittable, make sure it's cheap, easy, lightweight, small, whatever. Make sure that it's workable, and then hopefully most people will comply with this.
A lot of people have said, I'm wondering if you've heard this as well, but a lot of people have said that remote ID is really for the big guys to be able to do drone delivery and things like that. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure if it's just for them. I mean, in order to make large-scale drone operations, commercial drone operations feasible, you need remote ID. I totally understand that part. I think in terms of homeland security, I think a lot of the concerns were more related to people trying to rig, let's say, a Phantom 4 with a hand grenade and then doing some dumbass stuff with that. So I think remote ID is for both situations. One, it's an enabler for commercial operations. Two, I think it also has to do with security and just being able to know what drones are out there and where they're headed and who's flying those drones.
I agree that we've got to keep up the fight for privacy because there's some backdoors and some vagueness in this whole thing that we're going to be kind of talking about here in the coming weeks as we dive down. There's probably 100 stories within this 400-page document. But let's get back to positives here, Haya, which brings us to our next story. As we had talked about previously in the news show about DJI kind of changing the game about how we can learn to go from a line-of-sight flight to FPV flight. So if you're an FPV pilot, you know the immersive experience is completely different from flying a line-of-sight, aka looking at the drone. And that kind of brings up another point regarding compliance, Haya, as a lot of people have argued that a lot of FPV pilots already fly out of compliance. And some people say it's like breaking the speed limit. So I'm not the judge. So I'm not gonna touch that with a 10-foot pole, frankly. But the positive here is it looks like at CES we might see the DJI FPV drone, and it looks like you've got two fresh new photos of what to expect.
Yeah, initial rumors indicated that we might have seen the DJI FPV drone to be launched before Christmas. Now, of course, we're in the new year already, so obviously that didn't happen. Now the latest photos show the remote controller in much greater detail, as well as the drone itself. And if we start with the remote controller, you see, of course, you have the control sticks. There's a C1, a custom button, on-off switch, LED lights on the top, as you can see in the photo in the article. And also at the top, you see this black plastic piece. And if you look at, let's say, the remote controller, this one that comes with your Mini 2 and Mavic Air 2, you have a similar plastic piece. In this case, it's to mount a smartphone. Now, we don't think that that's the case for the FPV drone, because in another photo you can see it seems to be a foldable antenna that you kind of fold upwards and is an antenna. So we don't think you need the phone there. Of course, this comes with goggles as well. So whatever information you need to see, it will be displayed inside your goggles most likely anyway. So the remote controller is different. It's also a very different shape. It's more shaped like a PlayStation controller. I actually think that might actually be a great benefit. I think it might actually feel better in your hands and be more ergonomic. If we switch to the second article, we see a close-up picture of the drone, and it's taken with a wide-angle camera, so the drone looks ridiculously large, almost comparatively to the person in the background. I don't think that's the case. I think that's just optical perception, basically, that because of the lens that was used. You can see for sure the beefy arms, beefy motors. It seems to be a very sturdy drone. It's not the prettiest by any means. It's not quite a pretty drone at all. It's a bit of a Frankenstein drone, but if it flies really well, who cares, right? At the front, you can see what's interesting is that there's two black circular things on the left and the right of the center of the drone, which we suspect is a obstacle avoidance sensor system, making this drone easier to fly for people that have never flown an FPV drone before. The other thing that's important to point out is that you will not have to use a GoPro or a DJI action camera to come with this drone. What we've heard is that this drone is going to record 4K at 60 frames per second, and you only need one camera, both for being able to fly the drone as well as recording your footage, which is a huge benefit. The camera is mounted on a one-axis gimbal, which I suspect might actually mean that the camera will automatically adjust based on the pitch and based on the speed at which you're flying your drone. That will be a very nice feature for sure. And I think this is probably also how DJI is going to position this drone. I don't think they're going to go after the hardcore FPV racers. I think this is more to get people into FPV drones, and also for people who really appreciate the more cinematic moves that you can make with FPV drones. So I think they're going to position it differently and not compete with the hardcore FPV crowd. Now, going back to CES, this drone was not launched before Christmas. So then the question, of course, becomes when will they launch it? We know that the last two drones DJI launched were purely online events because of the coronavirus pandemic. CES 2021 is going to be an online event as well. It would not surprise me at all possible if DJI decides to launch this drone right in the middle of that or at the beginning of that event. CES runs from January 11th through 14th. So who knows, with a little luck, in a week from now, roughly, we might have a new DJI drone on our hands, which would be freaking amazing.
It really would be amazing. It really would. Frankly, I'm excited too, Haya, because I think, again, that this really kind of changes the way that we think about flying, which is exciting. That said, that brings us to our final story for this news episode, which is regarding the Mini 2. It seems like there is a new firmware update that adds quite a bit here, Haya. And I'm curious what it adds because, holy cow, that drone is a mini powerhouse.
Yeah, it's. I think the original Mavic Mini was impressive already, being able to come up with a drone that actually flies that well, weighing less than 250 grams. Now, of course, the Mini 2 takes it a step up, and quite a step up. Now we have OcuSync 2.0, we have 4K video capabilities, so now all of a sudden this little drone becomes a more significant drone. Colors were way better in both still photography and video because of an increased bit rate. And of course, the benefit of the Mini 2 is that it's so lightweight that if you travel internationally to, let's say, Canada or as of now, actually a lot of the European countries, you can fly this drone with much, much fewer restrictions, sometimes even no restrictions at all, which makes it the ideal travel drone. Now, DJI with a firmware upgrade added the option for 2.7K video, which is of course less than 4K video. You can argue how much it even matters when most people consume their media on smartphones anyway. But now you get different frame rates. You get 24, 25, 30, 48, 50 and 60 frames per second added in this mode. I've flown the Mini 2 quite a bit. I think it's, in a way, it's the ideal drone. I mean, yes, it's not the most capable, but it's the easiest one to take with you. Has great flight time. With those 3 batteries, you can fly for an hour and a half pretty much. You can throw it in your backpack, not even worry about it. It's not expensive. If there ever was an ideal drone to take with you anytime, anywhere, this is it, I think.
Wow. Frankly, exciting, man. Yeah. Just another huge push on such a small drone. You really wonder how they did it, but it seems like the push for small, we might just be getting more and more smaller drones. I recently saw an argument I wanted to run by you, which someone, and I actually can't even remember who this was, someone said, are drones that are sub 249 grams less safe because they have less sensors, like obstacle avoidance sensors, VPS, etc. What do you think about that?
I guess if you look at it that way, yes, because you don't have the obstacle avoidance sensors, so there's an increased risk of flying into obstacles, theoretically. However, with such a lightweight drone, if you do fly into something, you're going to do a lot less damage. If it falls out of the sky, it's not going to be 4 pounds coming down on somebody potentially. It's going to be a super lightweight drone. So in that sense, I would argue that the small drones inherently are a lot safer. One thing to point out, going back to remote ID, I mean, these drones, you don't need to register them as long as you fly recreationally. As soon as that turns into a commercial flight, now you need your Part 107, now you need to register the drone, and now even these small drones will need to comply with remote ID when that becomes a requirement. So the way you fly and the way you use the drone makes a big difference. If this drone is safer than the big drone, I would argue yes, just because of the reduced mass and weight of such a small drone.
Wow. There's just so much power in this thing. It's unbelievable. Well, Haya, thank you again for joining me this week in the news show. It's good to see you back. I know we kind of took a holiday break and just excited to be doing this again with you.
Same here, man. Appreciate it. And first show of the new year. Here's to many more.
Happy New Year. That's right. Yeah, 2021 is going to be an exciting one. And hopefully it'll be the year that maybe we push for a micro drone rule here in the United States. I don't know, but I would love to see that. I would love to see like what Canada has here. So, Haya, thanks again. That's going to do it for us today, everyone. Please don't be afraid to leave us a review. Leave us a like if you found us useful. Well, thank you. We appreciate it. Thanks again for all the support over the holidays. Really do appreciate the outpouring of support. It was incredible, Haya. A lot more than usual. And really do appreciate it. So thank you, everyone. That's going to do it for us today. Thanks again for joining us.